And good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on this lovely Wednesday. We have a lot to talk about, and I'm very excited to get started today. Today we're talking about setting client expectations, especially when it's hard. We'll be joined today by our very own Colby Stream, who's a project manager here at Page One Power. And I am your host, Colin Eggleston, Marketing Events Coordinator here at Page One Power. You can follow us along in the conversation at hashtag P1P webinar. My Twitter handle is DJ Colin Sick, and follow us at Page One Power as well. Your presenter today is Colby Stream, Project Manager here at Page One Power. How are you doing this morning, Colby?
Doing really great. Thanks for having me on.
We're very happy to have you today, and I'm very excited about this topic. I think this is one thing that is so crucial to an organization, but it's also a very tough skill to master. And I think that your take on it, and I think that your presentation and what you have to say is just incredible. And I think we're going to learn a lot today. So I'm very excited to get started. We will have a poll question today, and we also will be taking questions after the end of the presentation. The presentation should take about a half hour or so, and then at the end we will do a question and answer session. So please submit your questions. Feel free to submit them throughout the presentation, and we will get to them at the end. And we'll also have a poll question at the very end as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the reins over to Colby.
Awesome. Thank you, Colin, for that introduction and getting us kicked off. And we're just going to dive right in. And before we got to the really core, I want to talk about hard, because I didn't just say hard, sort of a snappy headline, but these are things that I've actually encountered that mean hard. So when clients assert undue pressure, if you've worked with clients, they sometimes do that. I really, really want this thing, and it's just pressure and pressure. And sometimes you can't give in, and so it can be hard to set and keep to expectations. Another example of when it's hard is when it sounds reasonable on the surface, and then when you really start to parse it and dig through it, you realize, oh, that's not actually something that we can accommodate. We need to reset expectations. A lot of times that's hard because when you hear that and it sounds reasonable on the surface, you say yes, and then later you discover, oh, actually we need to reset that expectation. And then another one is simply you want to make them happy. Part of my job as being project manager is I want my clients to be happy. And sometimes that can mean that I need to do something now. I need to set an expectation now that doesn't feel good, but later it will lead to happiness. There are probably a few other things we can fit on here, but largely they all fall into this. So you might come up with other meanings of hard, but to me, like, these are the things. When clients assert undue pressure, it sounds reasonable, and then later I find out actually there's a reason we can't do that, or I just want to make them happy, and so I have a hard time saying, hey, actually this is the way it's going to go. So when we're setting expectations, there are three components around which we're going to set expectations. And when you set expectations, we'll talk about how to do that in a minute. But when you set them, you're going to want to set them around these three different components. They're the ones where I've encountered when I talk to clients. When we're off on expectations, it falls into one of these three buckets. And so that first bucket is the product. And this is the actual thing that you will be delivering. Particularly in the marketing and SEO space, sometimes our language gets in the way, right? We might say, in the link building space, for example, we might say, well, I'm going to go get you 404 reclamation links, or I'm going to do broken link building. And those things are sometimes mismatched about what it is and what it's going to be. We saw this a few years back with co-citation and co-occurrence. We had a language problem. So the first thing is just to define the deliverable that you're going to produce very concretely. This is going to encompass both the lead deliverables, right? Here's the thing I'm giving you, and then the lag goal. Here's what we expect it to do. Here's how we expect it to affect you. The next thing is going to be our processes, and this is the way in which you will complete the product. again, particularly in the link building space, people have different opinions about how to go about building links and how long it should take in that process. And so whatever your product is, you also have to be able to describe the way in which you are doing it so that your client understands it. For sure, different clients are going to want different levels of understanding. It doesn't mean that every client or, by the way, I keep using the word client. For me, that means external. For you, that might mean an internal boss. So I think context around that. But and maybe your boss doesn't need to understand every facet. Your client doesn't need to understand every facet of the process, but they need to understand some of it so that they know how that process is leading to the product. And the last one is what I call service. And I use service to mean the service that you are going to provide. So the communication updates you're going to provide along the way. How often, when, what will they encompass? Just knowing when and how you're going to communicate. So let's talk about how we begin to define and set these expectations. Really, it's a three-step process that is simple and straightforward, but a lot harder to really put into action. Number one, define your expectations, what they are, and why. And again, we're defining these expectations in the why along the product, along the process, and around the service. And we're going to practice this at the end of the presentation. The most important thing here is to define the why. It's really, really easy to just say the what, but defining the why helps people understand. If you're a fan at all of Simon Sinek, he talks about this, the why, the what, the how. The why is at the center of the circle, and you've got to define the why because that's when it's going to connect. The other thing here is that it may take several people in a room debating, particularly right at the product and process level. For me, as a project manager, I'm coordinating the work, I'm making sure the work is getting done, but I'm not doing the work. And so to define the product, to define the process, requires me to sit in a room with the people who are doing the work and say, let's make sure we understand what we're doing and why, so that then I can communicate that service to the client. Step number two is feels very simple. It feels very like, Colby, why are you saying this? But it's so important. Practice communicating them. I can't describe the number of times, and you may connect with this, where like, oh yeah, I totally got that thing down, and then I start trying to describe to somebody, and I'm just sort of stumbling all over myself. It's really important that once we understand what the expectations are, the what and the why, that we practice communicating it. You should be able to communicate the what or the why of product, process, and service in about a paragraph, about 3 sentences. This doesn't mean that you need to memorize a script word for word, but you should be able to explain it at the drop of a hat. When somebody asks me whether they be a new employee at our organization, a client, a prospect, they ask me about our product or our process, the thing I'm saying is pretty much the same every time. It's clear, it's concise, I know what I'm communicating, and I know why. And so it's very important to stand in front of a mirror even and communicate this stuff. A good way to practice it is on your spouse, your significant other. I've done this with my wife, and she's tired of hearing it now. But it's helped me a lot, because when people ask me, I can clearly and concisely describe what and why for product, process, and service. And then the last one is also extremely important. This is to define objections and alternatives. It is, excuse me, it's really unrealistic for us to think that just because we describe the what and the why, that every time a client or a boss is just going to be like, okay, thumbs up, you'll get it. They're going to bring their own view to the table. They're going to say, well, I understand that, but I need this thing. And so the next step then is to define possible objections and what the alternatives could be. And again, this may require buy-in from other team members. Hey, we get this objection a lot. What are alternatives we can offer that is realistic to what we can do as an organization, to what you can do in terms of the work when I have my next, update meeting with the boss? And it's likely a fluid list. The objections that we are getting today are not the same as the objections we were getting 6 months ago or a year ago. This is an ever-changing industry, whether we are SEO or something more specific like link building or PPC, or more general, just digital marketing. It's a fluid list. Okay, let's do some practice. We'll do this based on an example of our product. So we're a link building company, and one of the ways that we go about acquiring links is in articles published on third-party sites. So we're going to walk through the what and why of product, process, and service around this, and then look at some potential objections. So, product for articles. Here's how this looks. A writer will publish an article under their name that cites or links to the client's site in a natural way. So it's just an article that our writer has written under their own name, links to the client, usually to a piece of content. It's important to note here that the product is the published article. It's that published article with the link in. Now, there's something missing from this slide, and I left it out very intentionally. The reason I left it out is because I wanted to demonstrate how easy it is to define the what and to forget about that why, to assume that everybody assumes that why. You'll notice I didn't put a why on this slide. So part of our why is that we found these links to be very, very powerful. We found it to be a great way to build links directly to content. We found that it's a way to get an editorially reviewed link that has a lot of great context around it. And by the way, if you've done it in a way that is user-focused, also drives click-through to the site. This is why we have this product. Let's talk about process. Here's how the process works. Writer may or may not already have a relationship with a site. They will pitch an article subject to that site owner. When they hear back positively, they will write it. It will go through our editorial process internally, and then they submit it to the site. We've created this because it's optimized to ensure a timely publication. So part of the why behind this, and I'm going to get into objections a little bit here, but part of the why behind this is that we want a process that ensures publication more consistently and as quickly as possible. Sometimes clients will say, I would like to see that article before it's published so I can give feedback on brand revisions or anything like that. But we found that those bog us down, and the longer we have between that pitch accepted and an article being submitted, the colder that prospect becomes, the less chance we have of publishing an article. And so we had to design this process very specifically to ensure that timely publication. We have a pitch to ensure that the editor is bought in. We run through our editorial process to ensure that this content is good content, and then of course it's submitted. Finally, what about the service around articles? Well, you have a project manager, that's me, who communicates that work along the way. And then in most cases, we also have a weekly phone call and or email updates, and it can be customized per the client. Why do we do that? We do that because clients want to be involved. They want to know what's happening. We offer weekly phone calls or updates so they can see what's happening on a weekly basis, but we also allow it to be customized. Some clients only want to touch base once a month, review the work that was done before. And so this is what we offer. This is why we offer it. So the next step is then anticipate objections. So one objection might be, I want to make sure that you're not affiliating my website with subjects I'm not comfortable with. We see this sometimes in the education space. We see this a lot in spaces that have high compliance. As a concrete example, you might get a pet client who says, I don't want to be affiliated at all with shock collars or bark shock collars or those sort of things. Like, it's just not part of our brand persona. So we offer an alternative. We say, well, alternative number one, just give us those topics. Like, if we're writing the articles, just tell us which things to stay away from. So they might say, I don't want to be affiliated with anything shock collar, shock fence, any of that related. Even if you're portraying it in a manner that I'm comfortable with, like let's just stay away from it. It's easier to do that. To harken back to something I've said, we have talked about this internally, and we've said this is something we can provide. Just give us a topics to stay away from, and we have coordinated across our departments to say we can do that. Alternative number 2, the client can be shown the article when it's submitted, and then the project manager can discuss how to optimize better for the future. So this requires team buy-in, and we've done this internally where we've said, hey, when we've submitted an article to a site, just upload that draft via Google Drive to Asana, and then me, your project manager, I'll grab that and I'll just share it with the client, and we can talk about things that maybe we can optimize better for in the future. As an example, one time I was working with an education client, and we had the first article done, and they looked at it and they said, hey, this is not really a big deal, but you might want to know when you're quoting like a professor or a faculty member, you might just want to stay away from using the term professor, particularly capital P professor. The reason is because not all of them are professors, and so you might use the term instructor or faculty member, those sort of things. And so it's a perfect example where he said, look, we're going to run our process so we can get your links, but you can help us optimize it along the way. So I was able to give that feedback to the team and adjust sort of mid-project. Okay, we went over a lot, so let's look back on what we've gone over, and then we'll jump into some questions here. So if you got some questions, start popping them in there. Looking back, so look, before setting expectations with clients, you've got to set them internally. It does not start with you telling the client, oh yeah, we're going to do this thing. It starts with your team setting them internally and understanding what the product is and why, what the process is and why, and then how you're going to communicate it, how often. Again, expectations, it should always define the what and the why. The why is really important. Product, process, service. Finally, anticipate objections. Practice communicating those alternatives. The more clearly, concisely, confidently that you can communicate those alternatives, the more they're going to buy it and see that those alternatives are good. If you're just stumbling all over yourself and trying to figure out what that alternative may be, less of a chance of the client going, yeah, that sounds great to me. Be able to understand the objections, communicate the alternatives. And there we've got them all on the screen. At this point, I think we're going to move into do a poll here.
That's correct. We are going to hop into a poll. I'm just going to launch this here real quick. Just a simple poll, kind of talking about if you're interested in learning more about Patreon Power, what we can do for you, and starting that conversation down the road. We would be happy to see what you think. So I'll just take a few moments here and just let the answers kind of flow in before we move on to question and answer time. Now, I know I have a couple questions that I just kind of wanted to ask. They're kind of bubbling up. And if anyone else has any questions, please submit them now. I'll be happy to address them live on the air. And if we don't get enough time to address everything, then we can definitely take those questions offline, and Colby and I would be happy to make sure that we get those answered for you in another manner. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. Thank you, everybody, for responding. Let's go ahead and hop into Q&A. So one thing, Colby, this subject is tough as you know, as someone that, you know, part of a business, as a business owner. You don't really, it's hard to address when you're going to not necessarily fail, but maybe have those difficult conversations. And so it's hard to really like launch into a business. You're having a great time with a lot of clients, and you're getting good, you know, good products out there, but you're not really paying a lot of attention when you need to communicate a issue or kind of a failure or something like that. And so this is a good way to kind of approach that. Do you think that that's do you think that that's an issue with a lot of businesses?
being able to communicate the failures when they come along.
Exactly, or something with the project doesn't, if the project kind of comes misaligned or something kind of goes off the rails a little bit, it's unforeseen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that happens a lot too in SEO, digital marketing sphere, right? This is not, I write CSS for a website and it works out the same way every time, right? It's link building, it's these other things. So certainly this is where communicating and recommunicating expectations, and particularly the process, really falls into that, right? So when something goes misaligned, to be able to go back and say, hey, remember this is what we had communicated as expectation. This is the process I talked about. I need to bring you up to speed on something that went wrong in that process or something that we discovered in that process. So we might sometimes, let's just take like technical audits, right? We'll be doing a technical audit in-house. We occasionally do those when clients have already bought link building and say, hey, I need this thing. And we'll start going through it, and I'll tell the client, hey, hey, our guy is going to do this. It should be done by the 14th. Mm-hmm. Well, the 12th rolls around, and I'm like, geez, that thing is not going to be done. This is the perfect scenario for me to get on my phone and recap the process. Hey, here's the process I talked about. We thought this part of the process was going to go really fast, and we actually discovered, these things in your website. It's going to take us X amount of time longer. And this is why I stress that why so much, because if you just say, hey, I know I said the 14th is going to be the 18th, we're going, well, what the hell? Why? But if you're saying, well, here's what happened, here's the process, and here's why it's going to take a little longer, we want to make sure that we provide that product we talked about in the way we talked about it, so the process is lengthening. And that's hard to do. If you're anything like me, you shy away from emotionally painful conversations like that.
Yes.
And so it's recognizing that. And this is why this process is so important to me, because if I sit down and I start really thinking intellectually, oh, this is what I communicated to him, here's where it's different. If I can just get on the phone and explain to her that this is what happened, that I expected this and this thing changed, they will be able to see that and understand why it's going to take a few days longer.
I noticed one thing in that example too that I think is really important is that you communicated with the client that there was an issue before the due date, so that there was plenty of time to, so you jumped on the problem, nipped it in the bud, and addressed it before it became something like, because the worst thing that I think that can happen is that if the project is late, it's late, it's going to be going late, but you let that due date come and go, and then the client has to go and knock on your door and say, what's going on? And I think, to me, that's kind of one of the worst case scenarios.
Yeah, and even if you find out on the due date, 4:45 p.m., like, you still need to jump in there and say, hey, I just found out, here's part of the process, I just found out from our technical guy, XYZ, it's going to be a little longer. Mm-hmm. You're right, if it gets to the 15th, it's going to be a little more painful.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, it looks like we have some questions rolling in here. Thank you, everybody. So we have a question from Ryan. Ryan says that I feel frequent communication with clients is important. How do you educate your clients and keep them in the loop if they are unwilling to hop on the phone and you feel confident that they aren't reading your emails? Now, this is definitely something that can happen across the board. And what's your experience? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is a really good question, Ryan. One of the things I played around with putting on that quote-unquote hard slide was like, when you keep telling a client something and they seem to understand, and then next time, like, the thing you've explained, they seem to have no understanding of. This is the same sort of scenario, right? Like, I've communicated it. It doesn't seem like they're reading my email, and they won't jump on the phone. There are a couple different scenarios here. I think, number one, there has to be a gut check. Like, are you over-communicating? It just happens to be the case that I have clients, I have people, they don't want to hear from me on a weekly basis. Yes, is frequent communication good? Is it important? Absolutely. Sometimes they just don't want that. And by the way, I've had clients I've worked with for a year, 2 years, that they just want to hear from me on a monthly basis. On the other hand, there are clients, and you may be describing one of these, where they're like frustrated all the time. You're trying to explain it in email. They don't want to jump on the phone. What do you do here? sometimes the best thing is just to get really direct. I talked a little bit about it's hard to set client expectations when you just want to make them happy. Sometimes we have to step outside of that and say, look, I'm not trying to be rude, but here's the deal. We have to get on the phone and talk about this. If you are unwilling to get on the phone and talk about this, I'm done explaining it. Here's the last explanation in email. I am done explaining this. I had a client actually do this to me where every month I'd send him off a report and he'd say, well, it'd be like every other month because the rankings for his main keyword would like jump around. Sometimes he'd be 3, sometimes he'd be 7, then he'd be back at 3. Every time he was at 7, why did we lose rank? And every time I got to the point where, like, I mean, he doesn't want to get on the phone. I got to the point where it's just like I started copy and pasting the same thing. Here's what's happening. And then the next month we'd be back up, and then the month after, I'd copy and paste it. At the end of the day, sometimes we just can't get what we want, and so we do our absolute best. So I would say get a little direct. There's a couple ways to do that. Hey, if you want to continue service, I really need to get on the phone with you. Or, hey, are you reading the stuff below because I need your actionable something on it? And then make something actionable so you can get it. And then if they're not, maybe you need to think about if they need less communication.
I think that, also one aspect of this is also figuring out, and this is a really tough conversation. It could be almost an entire webinar, and this is, we want every client to love us. We want every client to every relationship to be 100% successful. But there might come a point where we realize that the relationship is not going to be a good one necessarily, and we might even have to take steps to maybe say, hey, it looks like you're not satisfied. This isn't working out 100%. Maybe we should talk about parting ways. And it's like, but as a business, it's like, well, you're kind of, in one way, you're maybe purposely losing a little bit of income, but does that have a more positive impact in the long run?
Maybe. I would be very careful with that one. I've jumped the gun a little bit on that, where I've used that, like, maybe we should part ways. And it
Yeah.
blew up in my face because I was misreading
Sure.
the client. If I had just said, I have to get on the phone before we do this thing, they would have happily jumped on the phone.
Right.
But I created some really bad blood by saying, like, I think we should end service. And they were like, no, that's not what I want at all. Why are you giving up on me? So, yeah, use it very carefully. It is something you can use, and it has been positive in some cases where we've just said, like, especially when expectations were really mismatched, we'll go to them like, hey, it sounds like you expected the product was this thing, and our product is actually this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we shouldn't continue. And then, they'll say, oh, yeah, now that you've explained that, I think you're right.
We have another question here from Andrew. Andrew asks, how do you grow a relationship from outside vendor and client to a true partnership?
This is predicated on the belief that every client relationship can move into a true partnership. So let me begin by saying I don't think that is always the case. As I said, I have some clients I talk to once a month, and we are a vendor, and they do, they will ask our advice on things, but we're a little closer to vendor than true partnership. So the first response there, I guess I would say, is, what's that thing, like the 80-20 rule, right? Don't use your time, don't divide your time trying to do that with everybody. Do it with the ones where it's really going to matter and they really want that. I know that's lame to say. My goal is that we are a true partner with every single one of our clients, but if a client says, look, I need you to just fulfill this thing and do it really, really well, we'll do that, and maybe it's not a true partnership. That being said, I think there's something about the stories we tell ourselves, and so that's the story you're going to want to be telling. The clients where I have a true partnership, I'm saying that. We want to collaborate with you, and we want to collaborate in this way. Hey, we're going to do this thing, and here's how we think it can intersect with what you're doing. One of the things that has really challenged me in the last year is I've worked with a couple agencies where I work with the agency and they work with the client, and so I do a lot of teaching and a lot of arming, right? I say, hey, if I were going to talk to the client directly, here's how I would say it, here's how I would position it. And I think that helps to build a true partnership. At the end of the day, a lot of the stuff I've talked about today, I think, leads directly to that, right? When you set good expectations, when you communicate those things well, and then you execute on them, and you've done them in a way that is partnering, right? You said, hey, if you guys are doing that thing over there, we can take some of that and execute in this other way. So if you have your PR team out there, spreading the word, let us know, because we can go get the brand name linked. If we're setting expectations, if we are communicating in that way, if we are helping immerse ourselves into the organization, it's going to become a true partnership.
I had a question about kind of the methods of communication, because I know that a lot of businesses are in the same kind of boat that we are. There's not a lot of face-to-face, right? And so we'll have phone calls, we'll have conference calls, we'll have Skype walkthroughs, and then a lot of email, and maybe a little bit of chat. So do you think that, is there an advantage to having maybe a face-to-face meeting at some point, or does the method of communication really doesn't hamper setting expectations?
Most expectation setting needs to be done on the phone at the very least. If you can get in the same room, if you can have a video chat, all the better. There are a little bit of pluses you get from having that, benefits you get from having that. At the very least, needs to happen on the phone, and part of that is because you're trying to explain expectations and a viewpoint from one human being to another, and so it's partly a conversation to be able to say, hey, here's the product, here's the process, here's something that has changed. Do you have any questions around that, and be able to work it out? So I wouldn't engage in in-depth expectation setting via email. Email is a great place to reinforce, ask quick questions, get quick updates. So if you were to say, hey, I know it's noon on the 14th, that thing is due today, I'm still going to have it to you, don't worry about it, right? Quick thing. Hey, looks like we might be a couple days behind on this product. Very quickly, in 2 sentences, here's why. Happy to jump on the phone and talk it through if you need to, right? So I've given the update and getting on the phone. But my boss has always said, and I think he's right, that if your email is getting really, really long, it's time to just delete the email and call the client.
That's good advice. And I think that's a good point to end on. I appreciate everybody for tuning in today, and I appreciate the questions. And Colby, thank you so much for your time today. And I wanted to just let the audience know that we're partnering with BounceX at a new webinar on the 11th. So please join us for that, and watch your inboxes for more info there, and check us out on Twitter. Colby, thank you so much.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.